Hi everyone, welcome back to Ria's collection and let's make our 15th anniversary special Baileys and chocolate mousse cake today. Let's begin. So ideally, to make this cake, you need a spring form tin. But since I'm making this for our wedding anniversary, I am using a heart-shaped tin and I have lined it with a cling wrap. Just make sure you're pressing it into all the sides really well so that the final mousse cake retains the shape of your cake tin. So the first layer would be a chocolate layer. I am repurposing my buttery chocolate cake here and I'm using a few slices for the base. The number of slices you might need will depend on how thick or thin you slice them and how big or small your cake tin is. You will also need a soaking mixture, which is nothing but a combination of milk and Baileys. If you don't want to use Baileys, you can omit it. But if you still want to use it but don't have it, you can substitute that with dark rum and a little bit of instant coffee powder. It's just to mimic the flavor of Baileys. So we're going to mix the two together and set that aside. So instead of using a chocolate cake as a base, you can also use a vanilla cake or even a coffee flavored sponge. You could also use a cookie crust like an Oreo cookie crust, Biscoff, or even a graham cracker crust. Our next step is now lining the base of the cake tin with the cake slices. I have sliced the cake fairly thin because I wanted the base to be thin and the mousse layer to be much thicker. But if you want it to be another way, you can choose to slice your cake fairly thick. But I think this is of a good thickness because this is the kind of thickness that you normally find in, all these pastry shops. So since the cake is of a different shape than of the tin, I am breaking it up into smaller pieces and pressing them so that they all stick together. So use a cake that's fairly moist because this process will go quicker. This is almost like doing a jigsaw puzzle. So push it in tightly, pack it in really tight so that it maintains the shape. And once it's all gone in, we can start soaking this layer with the milk mixture that we made earlier. You wouldn't need a lot of cake for this. I just used about 5 thin chocolate slices. Let's get the milk ready. I'm using a pastry brush here. You could also use a silicone brush or even a spoon to pour the soaking liquid. And when you're doing this, make sure you're soaking the cake really well because it kind of makes the cake even more soft and moist. And I think it also helps in the mousse to stick to the cake even better. So maybe I'm thinking about 2 rounds of soaking. You start from one side, you reach the other side, and then go back again. That way, every bit of cake has that liquid. And the next step is to bloom a little bit of gelatin in some cold water. And whenever you add gelatin to water, don't just dump it, sprinkle it over the liquid like this, and then mix it up really well with a whisk or a small spoon. This is so that there's no dry bits of gelatin hanging around there. You want everything to be submerged in that liquid so that it can bloom really well. So blooming is nothing but, the gelatin absorbs the liquid and becomes like a gel, which you will later melt. So in the saucepan, I have some semi-sweet chocolate. If you're in India, use dark chocolate because the one that we get here is called semi-sweet. And I'm going to add in some heavy cream. Again, if you're in India, use fresh cream, not the whipping cream, which is sold frozen. And now we're going to make a ganache using the same. So do that on a medium heat and keep stirring. At the same time, I'm going to make a fairly concentrated coffee solution. So I've added some instant coffee powder and I'm topping it up with water. I've used hot water here straight from the kettle. We're going to set that aside. Now that the ganache is all made, I just love how glossy it turned out to be. I mean, every time I make ganache, it just, I just want to dive straight in or, drink it with a straw. So yeah, give it a good mix. Make sure there are no chocolate lumps. And now I'm going to add in the melted gelatin. I melted it in a microwave for 15 seconds. Add that in. The ganache is also hot. So the hot gelatin goes into the hot ganache and the hot coffee solution also goes in right now. The intensity of your coffee solution is something personal. So if you like it to be very strong, add more than what's mentioned in the description box. Now give that a good mix. Let it all come together. So when we do this, make sure everything is of the same temperature. Hot ganache, hot gelatin, and hot coffee. Otherwise, things will start to set when it's not needed. And now we're going to flavor it with our Baileys. Like I mentioned earlier, if you choose not to use Baileys, you can skip the step, or you can use a mix of coffee and dark rum if you don't have Baileys on hand. Yes, extra coffee in your rum if you're not using Baileys. We've already added coffee solution, but as a substitute for Baileys, you need more coffee and dark rum. So mix that all in. So our chocolate part is now all ready. We're going to let this cool down completely. So I'm going to transfer this liquid into a fairly larger bowl so that it cools down faster. It smells amazing with the coffee and the Baileys in there along with chocolate. And I mean, I really enjoy all the flavors and aromas when I'm cooking and baking, which is why I'm sharing it with you. So let this mixture sit for a bit, maybe like 20-25 minutes, and keep stirring it so that the process goes faster and it cools down really quickly. So in the meantime, I'm going to whip up some heavy cream to stiff peaks. So start on a medium speed, and as you get closer to the cream thickening up, then you can increase your speed. So the cream is thickening up really nicely. So once it reaches stiff peaks, you can turn the machine off. So we're getting the chocolate mix back, and I'm going to add in a tiny bit of that whipped cream into this chocolate, coffee, and Baileys mixture. So we usually call this little chunk of cream as a sacrifice. When I went to pastry school, that's what we called it, because we're just going to, just roughly mix it all in so that the liquid mixture gets lightened up, and we're not really thinking of deflating the cream at this point because it's a very tiny amount. That's why it was always called the sacrifice. Since this bowl is fairly large, it took me a little longer to mix it up, but if the bowl is a little more deep and smaller in diameter, you can mix it up even quicker. Now you're going to add in all of the remaining whipped cream and blend it all together. And at this time, you're going to do it very slowly and carefully, and You don't want to deflate all of that air you just whipped into that cream, because that is what's going to give you the texture for your mousse. So do this gently. You might think I'm doing it pretty roughly. It's just because I've sped up this step for the video, but I've done it with a very light hand. So the mousse is looking great. There's no more white streaks of whipped cream, and that's what you want. And we're going to bring our cake tin back so that we can fill it with the chocolate and Bailey's mousse that we just made. Let's pour that luscious mousse into the cake tin and just enjoy this beautiful sight. So once it's all scraped into the tin, we're going to chill this in the fridge for about 6 to 8 hours till it's completely set. It might take a little longer depending on how thick the mousse layer is. So I like to give this tin a wiggle and a slight tap just so that everything settles in the way we want it to be and there are no air bubbles in between. So now it goes into the fridge for a long sleep. Once my mousse was completely set, I transferred it into the freezer because I'm not using a springform pan here. So I covered it with the cling wrap that I had used for the sides, literally the excess that was hanging out. And once it was rock solid frozen, I took it out, and that's what you're seeing here. I'm tapping it out to get the mousse out of the tin. If you had used a springform pan, you can just unclip the sides and have it ready to use. But mine was a different case. I wanted it to be this shape, which is why I'm doing this extra step. And it always works. The texture doesn't change at all. So now that the mousse and the cake layers out of the tin, I'm going to get the cling wrap pulled away and I will transfer that onto a cake platter. The mousse cake is rock hard right now. And this step is completely optional. You don't have to clean out the sides. It was just my personal preference to have a smooth side at this time. So I am using my offset spatula. I warmed it up and I'm swiping it against the sides of my cake. So for that, you can hold the spatula straight against your fire, or you can just dip it in a glass of hot water and then wipe out the excess water onto a paper towel and then quickly slide it against the rough sides of your cake. You can use the same technique for your buttercream as well when you're frosting your regular cakes. The white dust that you see on top, it's just the freezer doing its thing when I left the mousse in it to be frozen. This mousse cake, once thawed, has no difference in texture at all. So if you were to use a different shaped cake tin, like me, go for it. Freeze your mousse cake and then pull it out. That way you can customize your dessert in any shape that you like. You're not like stuck with a round springform tin shape. I like how shiny the sides are right now because I used a hot offset spatula. It's a personal preference, that's all. So the next step is to dust the top with a little bit of cocoa powder. Do it with a light hand because cocoa powder is a little bitter. So if you're dumping out a lot of it, the top layer can taste a little bitter. You could also use a stencil here if you want to, put out a message and then dust over the stencil with the cocoa powder. Since I made this cake for our 15th wedding anniversary, I just want it to be simple. Just a thin layer of cocoa dusting on the top, and then I'm going to decorate it with some strawberries and blueberries. So one thing I like to keep in mind is whenever I'm decorating with something like this on the top, I like to do it in odd numbers because I feel it's more pleasing to the eye than to have even numbered pieces on top. So I'm just doing 5 pieces of strawberries and scattering a little bit of blueberries here and there. So I didn't have any particular design in mind. I was just going with the flow. And then I had some extra slices of the cake. I cut them up into smaller cubes and I just kept it on top here and there, just to add some extra interest and height. As you can see, I'm just playing around with it, which is exactly what you should be doing too. Like, have fun when you decorate something, especially when something is made for a special day like this. And I am also crumbling up a little bit of the cake slices, and I'm using the powder to add extra color on top. And I love the contrast of all the colors right now. Here you go. Bailey's and chocolate mousse cake is now ready to be enjoyed. I think it has turned out to be fantastic. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you guys try it at home and enjoy it too as much as we did. Until next time, bye.